Blood, Law, and Betrayal. A story of ultimate deception and deadly justice. My name is Alexander Sterling, and for 29 years, I believed I understood the difference between justice and vengeance. Growing up as the son of Jonathan Sterling, founder and senior partner of Sterling and Associates law firm, I've been raised to believe that the law was sacred, that truth always prevailed, and that good people could trust each other completely. How naive I was. The Sterling name carried weight in legal circles across the nation. My father had built our firm from a small practice in downtown Chicago into a powerhouse that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. We specialized in high-stakes criminal defense, corporate litigation, and the kind of complex cases that other firms wouldn't touch because they lacked either the resources or the courage to take them on. Our offices occupied 4 floors of the Millennium Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan and a reception area that looked more like a 5-star hotel lobby than a law firm. Everything about Sterling and Associates projected success, competence, and unshakable confidence. But our real reputation came from our track record. In 15 years of high-profile cases, we'd never lost a criminal defense trial. Not once. My father's strategic mind and my aggressive courtroom style had proven to be an unstoppable combination, and the legal community both admired and resented our consistent victories. "Alexander," my father said one morning as I reviewed case files in my corner office, "we need to discuss the Blackstone situation." Blackstone, Hartley and Morrison was the largest law firm in the country, with offices in every major city and a client roster that read like a who's who of Fortune 500 companies. They dominated the legal landscape for decades, charging premium fees and delivering results through sheer resources and political connections. Until we started taking their clients. It had begun innocently enough. A few corporate executives, impressed by our criminal defense victories, had moved their business litigation to our firm. Then their friends followed, attracted by our personalized attention and aggressive advocacy. Within 2 years, we'd poached nearly 30% of Blackstone's Chicago clientele, and our success was spreading to other markets. "What about Blackstone?" I asked, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. "James Blackstone called me personally yesterday," my father said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "He's not happy about the Morrison Industries contract." Morrison Industries was a massive manufacturing conglomerate that had been Blackstone's client for over 20 years. Last month, after we'd successfully defended their CEO against federal fraud charges that Blackstone's team had been unable to resolve, they'd transferred all their legal business to us. It was a $50 million annual contract, the kind of client that could define a firm's reputation. "Did Blackstone threaten us?" I asked. "Nothing that direct, but he made it clear that they consider our recent successes to be problematic for the stability of the legal profession." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Translation: they're losing market share and want us to back down. That's my interpretation as well. My father looked older than his 62 years, worn down by decades of high-pressure litigation and the constant stress of running a major law firm. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, and I could see the same competitive fire that had built Sterling and Associates from nothing. "What's our response?" I asked. "The same response we've always given to bullies," he said. "We work harder, win bigger, and let our results speak for themselves." That afternoon, I was preparing for a deposition when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Mr. Sterling, your father asked me to give you this case file. He said it's a favor for Judge Morrison." Judge Morrison was a long-time family friend who'd helped my father navigate the political aspects of building a law firm. If he was asking for a favor, it meant someone he cared about was in serious trouble. I opened the file and immediately understood why my father had chosen me for this case. The defendant was Isabella Cruz, a 26-year-old woman charged with first-degree murder in the death of her abusive ex-boyfriend. The evidence was circumstantial but damaging. She'd been at the victim's apartment the night he died. Her fingerprints were on the murder weapon, and witnesses had heard them arguing violently hours before his death. But as I read through the police reports and witness statements, I could see the inconsistencies that less experienced attorneys might miss. The timeline didn't quite work. The physical evidence had chain-of-custody issues. Most importantly, Isabella Cruz didn't fit the profile of someone capable of the kind of calculated violence that had killed Marcus Rodriguez. The case was officially pro bono. Isabella couldn't afford our usual fees, and Judge Morrison had personally requested that we take it on as a public service. But I could see why my father had assigned it to me specifically. This was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes criminal defense that had built our reputation. More importantly, it was the kind of case that would attract media attention and further demonstrate our superiority over firms like Blackstone, who avoided pro bono work because it didn't generate revenue. I called the county jail that afternoon to schedule a meeting with Isabella Cruz. I expected to find a frightened, possibly guilty woman who'd gotten in over her head with a dangerous man. Instead, I met someone who would completely reshape my understanding of love, trust, and the price of both. Isabella Cruz was beautiful in the way that made experienced trial lawyers worry about jury bias. She had the kind of striking Latina features, dark hair, expressive brown eyes, elegant bone structure that could either work in her favor or against her, depending on the composition of the jury and the skill of the prosecution. But it wasn't her appearance that caught my attention during our first meeting in the jail's consultation room. It was her intelligence. Within minutes of our introduction, I realized I was dealing with someone whose mind worked as quickly and strategically as any attorney I'd known. "Mr. Sterling," she said, studying my face with an intensity that was almost unsettling, "I want you to know that I didn't kill Marcus Rodriguez, but I also understand why the evidence suggests otherwise. Tell me what happened that night." Isabella's account was detailed, consistent, and completely at odds with the prosecution's theory of the case. She'd gone to Marcus's apartment to retrieve personal belongings she'd left there during their relationship. They'd argued, yes, but about his refusal to return items that belonged to her, not about reconciliation or revenge. "He was alive when I left," she said. "Angry, drunk, probably planning to call and harass me later like he always did, but alive." Who else had access to his apartment? His brother Tony, his drug dealer, a guy named Carlos who came by regularly. His ex-wife had a key, though I don't think she used it anymore. Marcus wasn't careful about security. As Isabella spoke, I found myself paying attention to more than just her words. She had a way of explaining complex situations clearly and logically, breaking down events into their component parts and analyzing them objectively. It was the kind of analytical thinking that made for good attorneys. "What did you do before this happened?" I asked. "I was a paralegal at Morrison and Associates," she said. "Small firm, mostly personal injury and family law. I was saving money for law school." "You want to be an attorney?" I wanted to be an attorney. Hard to practice law with a murder conviction on your record. The bitter irony in her voice caught my attention. Here was someone whose dreams had been derailed by a justice system that had apparently failed her, sitting across from someone whose entire life had been built on the assumption that the system worked. Over the next hour, as I took Isabella through the details of her case, I became increasingly convinced that she was innocent. The prosecution's timeline required her to commit murder, clean up evidence, and establish an alibi within a window of approximately 40 minutes. It was theoretically possible, but it would have required planning and cold-bloodedness that didn't match the woman I was interviewing. More importantly, Isabella's analysis of the evidence showed a sophistication that impressed me. She'd clearly been thinking about her case like a lawyer, identifying weaknesses in the prosecution's theory and potential alternative explanations for the physical evidence. "Isabella," I said as our meeting concluded, "I'm going to take your case, but I need you to understand something. I don't lose. Ever. If you're lying to me about anything, I'll find out, and it will destroy both our chances of success." "I'm not lying, Mr. Sterling, but I appreciate your honesty about your expectations. Call me Alexander." She smiled for the first time since I'd entered the consultation room, and I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with legal strategy. "Alexander," she said, testing out my name. "I like that better." Over the following weeks, as I prepared Isabella's defense, I found myself spending more time at the county jail than was strictly necessary. Isabella was helping me understand the nuances of her relationship with Marcus Rodriguez, the dynamics of domestic violence, and the social factors that had led to her being in his apartment that night. But our conversations increasingly strayed beyond the legal aspects of her case. Isabella was remarkably well-read, with opinions on literature, politics, and philosophy that challenged my own assumptions. She'd grown up in circumstances very different from my privileged background, but her intelligence and ambition had carried her far from her origins. "You don't act like other wealthy attorneys I've met," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed witness statements. "How do other wealthy attorneys act? Condescending, like they're doing charity work when they talk to people like me. You treat me like an equal." "Because you are an equal. Intelligence isn't determined by bank account balances." Isabella studied my face with that intense expression I'd come to recognize. "Is that really what you believe, or what you think you should believe?" The question was more perceptive than I'd expected. The truth was, I'd grown up in circles where wealth and status were assumed to correlate with worth and intelligence. Meeting Isabella was forcing me to examine assumptions I'd never questioned before. "I'm learning," I admitted. "That's more honesty than I expected from a Sterling," she said with a slight smile. "What do you know about my family?" "Everyone in legal circles knows about Sterling and Associates. Your father built an empire, and you're the crown prince who's lived up to every expectation." "Is that what you think I am, a privileged crown prince?" "I think you're more complicated than that," Isabella said quietly. "I think you genuinely care about justice, but you've never had to fight for it the way most people do." She was right, and her assessment stung because it was delivered without malice or resentment. Isabella had simply observed something about my character that I'd never examined in myself. As we worked together to build her defense, I began to see the legal profession through her eyes. Isabella understood the law as a tool that could be used for good or evil, depending on who wielded it and why. She'd seen it fail people like her, poor, marginalized, without the resources to hire adequate representation, while protecting people like me, who could afford the best attorneys money could buy. "The system works for people who can afford to make it work," she observed during one of our strategy sessions. "What would you change about it?" "Everything," she said without hesitation. "But if I had to start somewhere, I'd make sure that quality legal representation wasn't a privilege reserved for the wealthy." Her passion for justice was infectious and authentic in a way that made me reconsider my own motivations for practicing law. I'd always thought I was fighting for truth and justice, but Isabella made me realize that I was fighting for truth and justice for people who could afford Sterling and Associates' fees. Preparing Isabella's defense required the kind of meticulous investigation that separated elite law firms from competent ones. I hired private investigators, forensic experts, and timeline analysts to dissect every aspect of the prosecution's case. What we discovered was even more compelling than I'd hoped. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife from Marcus Rodriguez's own set, had Isabella's fingerprints on it, but it also had partial prints from at least 2 other people. The prosecution had focused on Isabella's prints because they were the clearest, but they'd failed to adequately investigate the other evidence. More damaging to their case, the timeline they'd constructed required Isabella to commit murder, stage the crime scene, and establish an alibi in roughly 35 minutes. Our recreation of that timeline showed it was theoretically possible, but barely, and only if everything went perfectly. The prosecution's case is built on the assumption that Isabella is simultaneously a criminal mastermind and an amateur who left obvious evidence behind. I explained to my father as we reviewed our strategy. Juries like simple narratives, he warned. Complicated explanations can confuse them, even when they're more accurate. This jury is going to hear a simple narrative, I assured him. Isabella Cruz is an innocent woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, being framed for a murder she didn't commit by a prosecution team that rushed to judgment. But the more time I spent with Isabella, the more I realized that her case was becoming secondary to my growing feelings for her. She was unlike any woman I'd ever known, brilliant, passionate, and completely unimpressed by the Sterling family name or fortune. "You know," she said one evening as we worked late in the jail's conference room, "when this is over, assuming I don't go to prison for life, I'd like to take you to dinner." "Isabella, I know it's inappropriate while I'm your client. I know you probably don't date women from my background, but I also know that what's happening between us is real, and I don't want to pretend otherwise." She was right about the attraction being mutual, though I'd been trying to maintain professional boundaries. Isabella was everything that the women in my social circle weren't: authentic, passionate, willing to challenge my assumptions rather than simply agreeing with them. "When you're acquitted," I said carefully, "I'd be honored to take you to dinner." "When, not if. I don't lose, remember." Her smile lit up the sterile conference room, and I knew that whatever happened with her case, Isabella Cruz had already changed my life in ways I was just beginning to understand. The trial began on a Monday morning in October, with media attention that rivaled some of our highest-profile corporate cases. The story had everything journalists loved: a beautiful defendant, a wealthy attorney, allegations of domestic violence, and enough ambiguity to keep people arguing about guilt and innocence. But what really drew attention was the fact that Sterling and Associates was handling a pro bono murder case. Legal commentators speculated about our motivations, with some suggesting it was a publicity stunt designed to enhance our reputation at Blackstone's expense. They weren't entirely wrong, though my own motivations had become much more personal than firm strategy. The prosecution's case was competently presented but ultimately circumstantial. They established that Isabella had been in Marcus Rodriguez's apartment, that she had motive to harm him, and that physical evidence connected her to the crime scene. What they couldn't establish was exactly how or why she'd committed murder. Our defense focused on the rushed investigation, the alternative explanations for the physical evidence, and the complete absence of premeditation that would be required for first-degree murder. I systematically dismantled the prosecution's timeline, showed the jury how the physical evidence could be interpreted differently, and presented Isabella not as a vengeful killer, but as a victim of circumstance and prosecutorial overreach. But the moment that won the case came when I put Isabella on the stand to testify in her own defense. "Miss Cruz," I said, "did you kill Marcus Rodriguez?" "No, I did not." "Have you lied to this jury about any aspect of your testimony?" "No, I have not." Isabella's testimony was clear, consistent, and completely convincing. She acknowledged the problems in her relationship with Marcus, admitted to the argument they'd had on the night he died, but explained her actions in terms that made perfect sense for an innocent person caught in terrible circumstances. More importantly, her intelligence and sincerity came through in every answer. This wasn't someone capable of the cold-blooded calculation required for murder and cover-up. This was someone who'd been trying to rebuild her life after escaping an abusive relationship. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty on all charges. As the judge dismissed the case and Isabella was formally released, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave me my life back." "You earned it," I replied. "You were innocent and the truth came out." That evening, as we celebrated at an upscale restaurant downtown, I reflected on how much the case had changed me. Isabella had forced me to examine my assumptions about justice, privilege, and the responsibility that came with my advantages. "What happens now?" I asked as we shared dessert. "Now I figure out how to rebuild a life that was almost destroyed by false accusations," Isabella said. "I've been offered my job back at Morrison and Associates, but I'm thinking I might want something more challenging." "Such as?" "Sterling and Associates is always looking for talented paralegals, isn't it?" The suggestion surprised me, though it shouldn't have. Isabella's legal instincts and analytical skills would make her an asset to any firm, and working together would allow us to explore the relationship that had been developing throughout her trial. "I'll talk to my father," I said. "And after work hours?" "After work hours, we see where this leads." 6 months later, Isabella had proven herself to be one of the most capable legal minds I'd ever worked with, and our personal relationship had evolved into something I'd never experienced before. She challenged me intellectually, supported my ambitions, and brought a perspective to our work that made me a better attorney. When I proposed to her on the anniversary of her acquittal, Isabella's response was everything I'd hoped for. "Yes," she said, "but on one condition." "Which is?" "When we're married, I want to be a full partner in every aspect of our life together. Not just your wife, but your equal in business, in decisions, in everything that matters." I wouldn't have it any other way. Planning our wedding felt like planning the future I'd always wanted, but never known how to find. Our engagement period should have been the happiest time of my life. Isabella and I were planning a wedding for the following summer. Her work at Sterling and Associates was exceeding every expectation, and our personal relationship continued to deepen in ways that made me grateful for every day we spent together. But somewhere around month 3 of our engagement, subtle changes began appearing in Isabella's behavior that I initially dismissed as wedding stress, or the normal adjustments of two people learning to share their lives completely. The first sign was financial. Isabella had always been careful with money, a natural result of growing up without much and understanding the value of financial security. But her carefulness was evolving into something that felt more like obsession. "Alexander," she said one evening as we reviewed our joint account statements, "I think we need to be more strategic about our financial planning." "Strategic how?" "You're putting money into this account every month, but I haven't been contributing much. That creates an imbalance that could be problematic if something happens to your income. Isabella, you work for my family's firm. Your salary comes from the same source as mine, effectively. We're building this together. But legally, the firm belongs to you and your father. If something happened to your relationship with him, or if the firm faced financial difficulties, I'd have no protection." The conversation made me uncomfortable, partly because it suggested Isabella was thinking about our relationship in terms of risk management rather than partnership. But I also recognized that her concerns weren't unreasonable. She'd grown up with financial insecurity, and it made sense that she'd want to protect herself against potential problems. "What do you think we should do?" "I think we should formalize my role at the firm. Maybe discuss the possibility of making me a junior partner after we're married." The suggestion surprised me. Isabella had been working at Sterling and Associates for less than a year, and while her work was exceptional, Partnership typically required years of experience and proven business development. That's a significant step, I said carefully. I know it's significant, but Alexander, I bring value to this firm that goes beyond my paralegal work. I've been helping you develop strategies for some of our biggest cases. I've been researching new practice areas that could expand our revenue. I think I've earned consideration for a more formal role. She wasn't wrong about her contributions, but something in her tone made me feel like I was being presented with an ultimatum rather than a request. Let me talk to my father, I said. When? When the timing is right. Isabella's expression tightened slightly. Alexander, we're getting married in 8 months. If I'm going to be your wife and your business partner, we need to establish clear expectations about how that relationship will work. That conversation was followed by others, each focusing on some aspect of our financial arrangements or business relationship that Isabella felt needed to be formalized or protected. She wanted her name on our apartment lease. She wanted access to our client development strategies. She wanted detailed information about the firm's financial structure and long-term business plans. None of her requests were unreasonable individually, but collectively they felt like someone preparing for a business negotiation rather than a marriage. The second change was more subtle but equally concerning. Isabella had always been brilliant at legal analysis, but she'd begun showing knowledge about our cases and clients that went beyond what she should have known in her role as a paralegal. The Morrison Industries contract renewal is coming up next month, she mentioned during dinner one evening. How do you know about that? I've been helping prepare the documentation. Isabella, that's partner-level work. I haven't assigned you to that project. Your father asked me to research some compliance issues related to their manufacturing contracts. I assumed you knew. I didn't know, and when I asked my father about it the next day, he seemed surprised by my question. Isabella asked if she could take on additional responsibilities to prepare for her expanded role after your marriage, he explained. I thought it was a reasonable request, given her capabilities. What expanded role? Alexander, you're marrying a brilliant woman who understands our business better than most attorneys with years of experience. It makes sense to give her access to higher-level work. My father's logic was sound, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella was maneuvering herself into positions of access and influence without fully discussing her intentions with me. The third change was the most troubling. Isabella had begun spending more time with my father than with me, often staying late at the office to discuss strategic planning or firm development while I was in court or meeting with clients. Your fiancée is remarkable, my father told me one evening after another of these extended strategy sessions. She has insights about the legal profession that most experienced attorneys lack. What kind of insights? She's identified several areas where we could expand our practice, new revenue streams we haven't explored. She's also been analyzing our competition, particularly Blackstone, in ways that could give us significant advantages. What kind of analysis? She's been researching their client relationships, their fee structures, their strategic weaknesses. Isabella believes we could capture an even larger share of their market if we're more aggressive in our approach. The conversation made me deeply uncomfortable. Isabella's interest in our firm's competitive position seemed to extend far beyond what would be appropriate for someone in her role, and her access to sensitive business information was creating potential conflicts I hadn't anticipated. When I tried to discuss my concerns with Isabella, she responded with hurt and defensiveness. Alexander, I thought you wanted me to be a full partner in our life together. That means understanding every aspect of the business we're building together. But some of the information you're accessing is confidential, meant only for partners. Then make me a partner. Formalize my role so there's no ambiguity about my access to information. We were caught in a circular argument that seemed to have no resolution. Isabella wanted access to information and decision-making authority that typically came with partnership, but she'd only been with the firm for months. I wanted her to be my equal partner in marriage, but I was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the speed at which she was accumulating influence within our business. The tension came to a head during a family dinner at my father's house in Lake Forest. My father had been drinking wine and was more expansive than usual about our firm's recent successes. "We've gained 12 new corporate clients in the past 6 months," he said proudly. "Revenue is up 40% over last year, and we're seriously considering opening offices in New York and Los Angeles." "How much of that growth is attributable to our competitive positioning against Blackstone?" Isabella asked. The question was sophisticated and showed deeper knowledge of our business strategy than I'd realized she possessed. "At least 60%, my father replied. "Isabella's analysis of their weaknesses has been invaluable in targeting their most vulnerable client relationships." I looked at Isabella, who was smiling with satisfaction at my father's praise, but something in her expression, a calculating coldness I'd never seen before, made me feel like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. That night, as we drove back to our apartment, I finally asked the question that had been building for weeks. "Isabella, what do you really want from this relationship?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you marrying me because you love me, or because you want access to Sterling and Associates?" The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment Isabella's composed mask slipped. "Alexander, that's not fair. I love you, and I also see the potential we have to build something incredible together. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." "But which one is more important to you?" "Why do I have to choose? Why can't I want both a loving marriage and a successful career?" She was right that wanting both was perfectly reasonable, but her non-answer told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. Over the following weeks, as wedding preparations continued, I found myself paying closer attention to Isabella's behavior and motivations. What I discovered was deeply troubling. Isabella had been systematically documenting our client files, business strategies, and financial information, ostensibly for efficiency purposes, but with a thoroughness that suggested she was building a comprehensive database of our firm's operations. She'd also been asking questions about our security procedures, our client confidentiality protocols, and our emergency contingency plans, information that would be valuable to someone planning to exploit weaknesses in our systems. Most concerning of all, she'd been encouraging my father to share detailed information about our competitive strategies against Blackstone, information that could be devastating if it fell into the wrong hands. But even as suspicions grew, I couldn't bring myself to believe that the woman I was planning to marry was capable of the kind of systematic deception her behavior seemed to suggest. That naivety would nearly cost me everything I cared about. I woke up on a Tuesday morning in March to find the other side of our bed empty and cold. Isabella often left early for morning runs or to prepare for important meetings, so her absence didn't immediately concern me. But when I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, I found something that made my blood freeze. A handwritten note on our dining room table, written in my father's distinctive script. "Alexander had to leave town unexpectedly on urgent business. Will call when I can. Don't worry. Dad." My father had never left town without detailed discussions about case coverage, client communications, and firm management. He was obsessively organized about business continuity and would never disappear without comprehensive planning. I called his cell phone immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I called his house in Lake Forest. No answer. I called his personal assistant at the firm. She hadn't heard from him since the previous afternoon, when he'd left the office at his usual time with no mention of travel plans. By noon, when none of my calls had been returned and no one had seen or heard from my father, I was genuinely frightened. Jonathan Sterling was many things, but irresponsible and unreliable weren't among them. I spent the afternoon calling hospitals, police departments, and anyone who might have information about my father's whereabouts. No one had seen him, no one had heard from him, and no one had any explanation for his sudden disappearance. That evening, Isabella returned home from what she claimed was a day-long client meeting in Milwaukee. She seemed genuinely shocked by news of my father's disappearance and immediately offered to help coordinate the search. "Have you called the police?" she asked. "They won't file a missing person report for 48 hours unless there's evidence of foul play." "What about private investigators?" "I've contacted 3 different agencies. They're starting background searches, but without more information, there's not much they can do." Isabella held me while I struggled with fear and helplessness unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My father and I had our differences, but he was the most important person in my life, the man who'd shaped my values and career. The thought that something terrible might have happened to him was almost unbearable. "We'll find him," Isabella whispered. "Whatever it takes, we'll find him." Wednesday brought no new information. My father's credit cards hadn't been used, his car was still in his garage, and his passport was still in his bedroom safe. It was as if he'd simply vanished from the world without a trace. Thursday morning, everything changed. I was in my office, reviewing case files and trying to maintain some semblance of normal business operations, when Isabella knocked on my door. "Alexander," she said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify, "we need to talk, privately." She closed the door behind her and sat across from my desk, with the same composed expression she'd worn during our first meeting at the county jail. "I know where your father is," she said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "I know where he is, and I know why he disappeared." "Isabella, what are you talking about?" She reached into her purse and withdrew a cell phone I'd never seen before. After pressing several buttons, she held it out so I could see the screen. It was a photograph of my father, sitting in what appeared to be a concrete room, tied to a metal chair with duct tape over his mouth. His eyes were wide with fear, and there was a dark bruise on his left temple. "What is this?" I whispered. "This is what happens when people become inconvenient," Isabella said, her voice completely devoid of the warmth and affection I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. I stared at her, trying to process what I was seeing and hearing. The woman I was planning to marry in 4 months was showing me photographs of my kidnapped father as if she were presenting evidence in a legal case. "Isabella, I don't understand. Your father is being held at a secure location outside the city. He's alive, he's not seriously injured, but his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." "Cooperation with what?" Isabella stood up and walked to the window overlooking Lake Michigan, her back to me as she spoke. "I need 2 things from you, Alexander. First, I need you to transfer ownership of Sterling and Associates to a holding company that I control. Complete ownership, assets, client contracts, intellectual property, everything." "That's impossible. Even if I wanted to, I don't have the authority to." "You're your father's heir and business partner. With his unavailability, you have full authority to make emergency business decisions." "And the second thing, $25 million transferred to an offshore account I'll provide." The numbers were staggering, but more devastating was the casual way Isabella was discussing the complete destruction of everything my family had built. "Why?" I asked. Isabella turned back to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never noticed before, a coldness so complete it was like looking at a stranger. Because Sterling and Associates has become a problem that needs to be solved. A problem for whom? For people who don't appreciate your firm's interference in their business operations. The pieces began falling into place with terrible clarity. Our competitive success against Blackstone, Isabella's detailed analysis of their weaknesses, her systematic documentation of our business operations. You work for Blackstone, I said. I work for people who have a vested interest in resolving the competitive imbalance that your firm has created in the legal market. How long? How long what? How long have you been working for them? The entire time, our entire relationship. Isabella's smile was genuinely pitying. Alexander, you're a brilliant attorney, but you're remarkably naive about people's motivations. Did you really think a woman from my background would fall in love with you for your sparkling personality? The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking, but it also provided a clarity I'd been avoiding for months. Every conversation about our financial arrangements, every request for business information, every strategic discussion with my father, all of it had been part of a systematic plan to destroy Sterling and Associates from within. The murder case, I said, that was planned too. Judge Morrison was convinced to request Sterling and Associates specifically for my defense. We needed a way to get me close to your firm's operations. Were you actually innocent? Does it matter now? It did matter, because it meant that everything I'd believed about justice, truth, and my own judgment had been built on deception. What happens if I don't cooperate? Isabella pulled out the phone again and showed me another photograph. This one showed my father in the same chair, but now there was a man in a black mask standing behind him, holding what appeared to be a long knife to his throat. Your father dies, Sterling and Associates gets destroyed through other means, and you spend the rest of your life knowing you could have saved him but chose not to. And if I do cooperate? Your father lives, you get to walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, and everyone moves on with their lives. Except our clients, our employees, our reputation. Alexander, Isabella interrupted, you're not in a position to negotiate. You have 48 hours to complete the transfers or your father dies. It's that simple. She left the phone on my desk, presumably so I could see additional photographs if I needed further motivation, and walked toward the door. Isabella, I called after her. Yes. Did you ever feel anything real for me, even for a moment? She paused with her hand on the doorknob. You were more likable than I expected, but Alexander, this was always business, never personal. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the photograph of my terrified, bound father, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal I'd experienced. The woman I'd loved, defended, and planned to marry had never existed. Isabella Cruz was a fabrication, a carefully constructed persona designed to infiltrate and destroy everything I'd spent my life building. But as I began to process the full implications of what she'd revealed, I realized something that Isabella had probably not anticipated. She'd underestimated both my love for my father and my capacity for strategic thinking under pressure. If Isabella wanted to play this as a business transaction, I was going to show her exactly how ruthless Sterling and Associates could be when someone threatened our family. The first person I called was Marcus Chen, a private investigator who'd worked on several of our most sensitive cases. Marcus was ex-military, discreet, and completely loyal to clients who paid him well and treated him with respect. Marcus, I need help with a situation that's complicated. How complicated? The kind where people might get hurt if we don't handle it carefully. There was a pause. Alexander, are you talking about something legal? I'm talking about saving my father's life. That afternoon, I met Marcus at a coffee shop in Chinatown, far from our usual downtown haunts. I showed him the photographs Isabella had left with me and explained the situation as objectively as possible. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered as he studied the images. "Who is this woman?" "Someone I trusted completely, which was apparently a catastrophic error in judgment." "What's your plan?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not handing over my family's business to people who kidnap innocent men." Marcus nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Information. I need to know where they're holding him, how many people are involved, and what kind of security we're dealing with. That's going to require resources, and it's going to be dangerous. I'll pay whatever it costs. And Marcus, I know this is far beyond what I usually ask of you. If you want to walk away, I'll understand." Marcus studied my face with the calculating expression of someone who'd made difficult decisions in dangerous situations. "Your father gave me a chance when other attorneys wouldn't hire an ex-con," he said finally. "I'm not walking away." While Marcus began his investigation, I started making other calls. Over the past 5 years of criminal defense work, I'd represented dozens of clients who'd been falsely accused or overcharged by ambitious prosecutors. Many of these clients had been genuinely innocent people caught in bad situations, and I'd either reduced their charges to minimal penalties or won outright acquittals. More importantly, I'd often reduced my fees or worked pro bono for clients who couldn't afford our usual rates but deserved competent representation. I told myself these cases were about justice, but now I realized they might serve a different purpose entirely. The first call went to Diego Morales, a former gang member I'd successfully defended against attempted murder charges that had been based on mistaken identity. Diego had gone straight after his acquittal, but he still had connections in communities where violence was sometimes a necessary tool for survival. "Mr. Sterling," Diego sounded surprised to hear from me. "Everything okay?" "Diego, I need help with something dangerous, something that's not exactly legal." "What kind of help?" I explained the situation as carefully as I could, emphasizing that this was about rescuing an innocent man, not about revenge or criminal enterprise. "How many people are we talking about?" Diego asked. "I don't know yet, but probably more than I can handle alone." "You want me to put together a crew?" "I want you to put together a team of people who owe me favors and are willing to take risks to pay them back." The second call went to Tommy O'Brien, a former police officer I'd defended against corruption charges that had been politically motivated. Tommy had lost his job but avoided prison, and he'd expressed gratitude for my work on his case. "Tommy, I need advice on tactical planning, and I need it to stay completely confidential." "What kind of tactical planning?" "The kind where innocent people's lives depend on executing a plan flawlessly." The third call was to Elena Rodriguez, a former military medic I'd helped with immigration issues for her family. Elena had skills that might be essential if the rescue operation went badly. By evening, I'd spoken with 8 people, all of whom had agreed to meet with me the following day to discuss a situation that required discretion and loyalty. But the most important call was to James Rodriguez, a client I defended against federal weapons charges. James was a licensed firearms dealer who'd been caught up in an ATF sting operation that had targeted him unfairly. After I'd gotten his charges dismissed, James had told me that if I ever needed anything, I should call him. "Mr. Sterling, been a while since I heard from you." "James, I need equipment, the kind that's not typically used for legal purposes." "What kind of equipment?" "The kind that might be necessary to save someone's life." "How soon do you need it?" "Tomorrow night." "That's fast." "James, it's my father. Someone has him and I'm running out of time." "I'll have what you need." That night, I sat in my apartment, the apartment I'd shared with Isabella for 8 months while planning our wedding, and tried to process everything that had happened. The woman I'd loved had never existed. The relationship I'd treasured had been a systematic deception. The future I'd envisioned had been built on lies from the very beginning. But more than personal betrayal, I was facing the possible destruction of everything my father had built over 30 years. Sterling and Associates wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, a reputation, a commitment to excellence that had defined our family's identity. I wasn't going to let that be destroyed by people who thought they could intimidate their way to market dominance. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text message from the number Isabella had been using. 24 hours remaining. Have the transfers ready. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed my response. I need proof of life. Recent photograph with today's newspaper. The reply came quickly. You're not in a position to make demands. I'm not transferring anything without proof that my father is still alive. 20 minutes later, I received a new photograph. My father, still bound to the same chair, holding a copy of that day's Chicago Tribune. He looked exhausted and frightened, but he was clearly alive. I forwarded the image to Marcus with a message. Can you identify anything about the location from background details? His response came an hour later, working on it. The concrete walls and lighting suggest a warehouse or industrial building, sending the image to contacts who might recognize specific details. I spent the rest of the night reviewing everything I knew about tactical planning, hostage rescue, and the legal implications of what I was planning to do. By dawn, I had a rough outline of a plan that was dangerous, possibly illegal, but represented the only chance I had to save my father without surrendering everything we'd worked to build. The meeting with my assembled team was scheduled for Thursday evening at a warehouse in an industrial district south of the city. As I drove there, I realized I was about to cross a line that would fundamentally change who I was and how I understood justice. But some lines are worth crossing when the people you love are in danger. The warehouse belonged to Diego's cousin, who used it for legitimate auto repair work but didn't ask questions about after-hours meetings. When I arrived, 8 people were waiting for me, men and women whose lives I'd helped save through legal advocacy, and who were now willing to risk their own freedom to help save my father. Before we start, I said, looking around the group, I want everyone to understand what I'm asking. This is dangerous, it's probably illegal, and if something goes wrong, you could face serious criminal charges. Anyone who wants to leave can walk away right now with my gratitude and no hard feelings. No one moved. All right then, I said, here's the situation. I explained everything. Isabella's deception, the kidnapping, the demands for money and business ownership, and the deadline that was now less than 18 hours away. So we're talking about a rescue operation, said Tommy O'Brien, the ex-police officer, against people who are organized enough to plan and execute a sophisticated kidnapping. That's right. Do we know how many hostiles we're dealing with? Not yet. Marcus is working on intelligence, but we're probably looking at a minimum of 3 or 4 people, possibly more. Diego leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, with respect, this isn't the kind of operation you plan in 18 hours. Hostage rescue requires detailed reconnaissance, careful planning, backup contingencies. Which is why we're not planning a traditional hostage rescue, I interrupted. We're planning a direct assault with overwhelming force and surprise. The group exchanged glances that made it clear they thought I was either naive or desperate. Alexander, said Elena Rodriguez, the former medic, direct assaults get people killed, including hostages. So does surrendering to kidnappers' demands. These people aren't going to release my father even if I give them what they want. They can't afford to leave witnesses who can identify them. Tommy nodded slowly. He's got a point. Professional kidnapping operations don't usually end with everyone walking away safely. So what are you proposing? Diego asked. I spread a map of the Chicago metropolitan area across a makeshift table. Marcus is tracking down the location where they're holding my father. When we have that information, we hit them hard and fast, extract my father, and get out before they can organize a response. "What about weapons?" asked Rico Santos, a former Marine I defended against assault charges that had been based on a barroom fight. "James Rodriguez is providing equipment tonight. Military-grade weapons, body armor, communications gear, everything we need to match their capabilities." "And afterward," Elena asked, "what's our extraction plan?" "Afterward, we disappear. Everyone goes back to their regular lives, and we never discuss this operation with anyone." "What about Isabella and whoever she's working for?" That was the question I'd been wrestling with all day. In a traditional hostage situation, the priority would be extracting the victim safely and letting law enforcement handle the criminals. But this wasn't a traditional hostage situation. It was corporate warfare using criminal methods, and traditional responses wouldn't work. "Isabella and her employers made a strategic error," I said finally. "They assumed I would prioritize my father's safety over everything else, including justice. They were wrong." "Meaning?" I looked around the group, making eye contact with each person who'd agreed to help me. "Meaning we're not just rescuing my father. We're sending a message that Sterling and associates can't be intimidated, manipulated, or destroyed by people who think kidnapping and extortion are acceptable business practices." At 10 p.m., Marcus called with the intelligence we'd been waiting for. "I found him," he said. "Industrial warehouse complex in Cicero, about 20 miles southwest of downtown. Building is isolated, minimal neighbors, good access routes for both approach and extraction." "How many hostiles?" "Best estimate is 4 to 6 people. 2 vehicles on site, rotation of guards, professional-level security protocols." "What about my father?" "He's being held in what appears to be a converted office space in the back of the warehouse. Single access point, but the room has windows that could serve as alternate entry points." "When can we move?" "James has your equipment ready. If we leave by midnight, we can be in position by 2 a.m. when their security is likely to be at minimum alertness." I looked around the warehouse at the people who'd agreed to risk everything to help someone who'd once helped them. They were checking weapons, reviewing tactical plans, and preparing for what might be the most dangerous night of their lives. "One more time," I said. "Anyone who wants to walk away." "We're not walking away," Diego interrupted. "Your father gave all of us second chances when we needed them most. Now it's our turn to do the same for him." At 11:30 p.m., I called the number Isabella had been using and left a voicemail. "I'll have the transfers ready by morning. Don't hurt him." At midnight, we loaded into 3 vehicles and headed for Cicero. The drive gave me time to think about what I was doing and why. 24 hours earlier, I'd been a successful attorney whose biggest concern was planning a wedding. Now, I was leading an armed rescue operation against professional criminals, risking not just my life, but the lives of people who trusted me with their own futures. The transformation should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like I was finally becoming the man I was meant to be. Not the privileged son of a successful lawyer, but someone willing to fight for the people and principles that mattered most to him. As we approached the warehouse complex, I checked my equipment one final time. James had provided me with a Colt M1911 pistol with custom gold plating and ivory grips, a weapon that was both functional and symbolic of the Sterling family's commitment to excellence in everything we did. "Remember," I said into the radio headset that connected me to the rest of the team, "we go in hard, we extract my father, and we get out clean. No unnecessary risks, no heroics, no one gets left behind." The warehouse sat in a cluster of similar buildings, surrounded by empty lots and minimal lighting. 2 cars were parked outside, and I could see the glow of cigarettes from guards who were clearly trying to stay alert during a long, boring night. They had no idea that their boring night was about to become very interesting. At 2:15 a.m., we moved into position around the warehouse. Marcus and Rico approached from the south, where they could provide overwatch and cover our retreat route. Diego and Tommy flanked the building from the west, ready to intercept any hostiles who tried to escape. Elena positioned herself with our vehicles, prepared to provide medical support and emergency extraction. That left me to lead the direct assault on the main entrance, supported by Tony Martinez, a former security contractor I'd successfully defended against weapons trafficking charges that had been based on a misunderstanding about military surplus equipment. Two guards at the front entrance, Marcus whispered through our radio system. Both armed, but they look bored and inattentive. Any sign of interior movement? I asked. Negative. Building appears quiet except for the guards. I checked my M1911 one final time, ensuring that the gold-plated weapon was loaded and ready. The ivory grips felt solid and familiar in my hand, a reminder that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting everything the Sterling family had built over decades of hard work and ethical practice. All units, this is Alexander. We go on my mark. Remember, minimal force necessary, extract the hostage, neutralize any threats. Roger, came the responses from around our perimeter. I took a deep breath, thinking about my father sitting terrified and bound in that warehouse, probably wondering if his son would choose business concerns over family loyalty. He was about to find out that Sterling men didn't abandon the people they loved. Mark, I whispered into the radio. The assault began with coordinated precision. Marcus and Rico engaged the exterior guards with suppressed weapons, eliminating the perimeter security before they could sound an alarm. Diego and Tommy breached the side entrance while Tony and I approached the main door. The warehouse interior was dimly lit, with high ceilings and concrete floors that would amplify any sounds we made. I could see office spaces along the back wall, exactly as Marcus had described from his reconnaissance. Movement northwest corner, Tony whispered, gesturing toward shadows near what appeared to be a loading dock. Two figures emerged from behind stacked crates, both carrying automatic weapons and wearing dark clothing that suggested professional training. These weren't local criminals hired for a quick job. These were experienced operators who'd been specifically chosen for a high-stakes kidnapping. The first gunman spotted Tony and immediately opened fire, sending bullets ricocheting off concrete walls and metal support beams. Tony dove for cover behind a forklift while I flanked right, using shipping containers as concealment while I maneuvered for a clear shot. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the enclosed space, but I could hear Diego's voice through my radio headset. Multiple hostiles, east side. We're engaged. The second gunman was trying to reach what appeared to be an alarm system near the office spaces. If he succeeded in alerting anyone outside the warehouse, our entire operation could be compromised. I raised my M1911 and fired 3 quick shots, the gold-plated pistol bucking in my hand with familiar recoil. 2 bullets struck the gunman's center mass, dropping him before he could reach the alarm. Target down, I reported. Alexander, this is Rico. We've got vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like reinforcements. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. What should have been a quick extraction was turning into a sustained firefight against an unknown number of hostiles, with potential backup arriving. All units accelerate timeline, I ordered. Locate the hostage and prepare for immediate extraction. Tony had eliminated the first gunman and was advancing toward the office spaces. I could see light coming from under a door at the far end of the building, probably the room where my father was being held. But between us and that room, 2 more armed figures had taken positions behind concrete support pillars, creating a crossfire that would be difficult to navigate without casualties. Covering fire, I called to Tony, then began laying down suppressive fire with my M1911 while he advanced toward the hostage location. The return fire was intense and professional, suggesting these people had significant combat experience. Bullets sparked off metal equipment around me as I moved from cover to cover, working my way closer to the office where my father was being held. The sound of breaking glass came from my left. Diego had found an alternate entry point and was advancing through what appeared to be a maintenance area. "Contact east side," Diego's voice crackled through the radio. "One hostile down, advancing on the target location." The reinforcements Rico had spotted were getting closer. Through the warehouse's dirty windows, I could see headlights approaching fast, probably 2 or 3 vehicles full of additional gunmen. "Rico, how long before the cavalry arrives?" I asked while reloading my M1911. 2 minutes, maybe less." We were running out of time. If those reinforcements reached the warehouse before we extracted my father, we'd be trapped in a sustained battle we couldn't win. I made a decision that went against every tactical principle I'd learned from Tommy and Diego. "Tony, suppress those support pillar positions. I'm going directly for the hostage room." "Alexander, that's suicide. You'll be exposed for 30 yards of open ground." "My father doesn't have 30 yards worth of time." I sprinted across the warehouse floor, zigzagging to avoid the concentrated fire from the remaining hostiles. Bullets whined past my head and sparked off the concrete around my feet, but somehow I reached the office door without taking a hit. The door was locked, but a few shots from my M1911 destroyed the lock mechanism. I kicked the door open and found myself face to face with the nightmare I'd been dreading. My father was bound to a metal chair in the center of the small room, just as Isabella's photographs had shown. But now I could see what the images hadn't revealed. There was a complex device strapped to his chest, with wires, electronic components, and what appeared to be several blocks of plastic explosive. A bomb. Standing behind my father, her hand holding a small electronic device, was Isabella. She looked nothing like the woman I'd fallen in love with. Gone was the warmth, the intelligence, the passionate commitment to justice that had attracted me. In their place was a cold, professional demeanor that belonged to someone accustomed to violence and deception. "Hello, Alexander," she said calmly, as if we were meeting for coffee rather than a life-or-death confrontation. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to choose this approach." "Let him go, Isabella." "That's not my name, actually. It's Sarah Chen, and I work for a private security firm that specializes in corporate problem-solving." "You work for Blackstone." "Among others, the legal profession is more competitive than most people realize." Behind her, I could see another figure in the shadows, a man in tactical gear holding an assault rifle trained on my father's head. "The bomb," I said, gesturing at the device strapped to my father's chest. "Insurance," Sarah replied, "in case you decided to do something heroic and stupid, which apparently you have." "What's the trigger mechanism?" "Dead man's switch," she said, holding up the electronic device. "If I let go of this button, your father becomes a memory. If you shoot me, same result. If anyone tries to disarm the device without the proper code, same result." The tactical situation was hopeless. Even if I could eliminate Sarah and her backup, the bomb would detonate if she released the trigger. My father would die either way. "So what now?" I asked. "Now you make a choice. You can surrender, order your people to stand down, and we'll proceed with the original plan. Your father lives, you transfer ownership of Sterling and Associates, and everyone walks away. Except my father, and I become liabilities who know too much about your operation. That's a risk you'll have to take." Through my radio earpiece, I could hear the sounds of the firefight continuing in the warehouse. My team was holding their own, but the reinforcements would arrive soon, and our tactical advantage would disappear. "Alexander," my father said quietly, speaking for the first time since I'd entered the room. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Don't give them what they want." "Dad, Sterling and Associates means more than just our family. It represents justice for people who can't fight for themselves. Don't let these people destroy that." Sarah's expression tightened with irritation. How touching, but sentiment doesn't change the tactical reality. She was right about the tactical reality, but she'd made the same mistake that had cost her the advantage from the beginning. She'd underestimated how much the Sterling family was willing to sacrifice for the things we believed in. "Sarah," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Make it quick." During our relationship, when we were working together on cases, planning our future, did any part of you ever regret what you were doing? For just a moment, something flickered across her face that might have been genuine emotion. "It doesn't matter now," she said. "It matters to me. Alexander, you were a mark, a target, someone I was assigned to manipulate for a specific purpose. Whatever I might have felt personally was irrelevant to the mission. But you did feel something. I felt impressed by your integrity. You really believed in justice, in helping people, in building something meaningful. It was naive, but it was also admirable. Naive enough to trust you completely. Naive enough to believe that people like me could change." The admission hung in the air between us, and I realized that Sarah's greatest weakness wasn't her ruthlessness or her willingness to use violence. It was the small part of her that had genuinely cared about the man she'd been assigned to destroy. That weakness was going to cost her everything. "Sarah," I said quietly, "what happens to you after this operation is complete?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you really think Blackstone is going to let you walk away with detailed knowledge of their criminal conspiracy? Do you think they're going to trust someone who's demonstrated the ability to manipulate and betray people she's supposed to care about?" For the first time since I'd entered the room, uncertainty flickered across her face. "You're trying to manipulate me." "I'm trying to save your life along with my father's. Because, Sarah, you're not their partner in this operation. You're another loose end they'll need to eliminate." "That's not true." "Think about it. You know their methods, their identities, their willingness to use kidnapping and murder for business purposes. You've seen how they operate when someone becomes inconvenient. What makes you think you're different?" The gunman behind my father shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his face. Professional, cold, completely focused on the mission. This wasn't someone who cared about Sarah's well-being or future. "They promised me." "They promised you what? Money, a new identity, a comfortable retirement?" I shook my head. "Sarah, you're talking about people who kidnap innocent men and strap bombs to their chests. Their promises aren't worth anything." "Alexander, stop talking and make your decision," the gunman said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We have a schedule to maintain." "See," I said to Sarah, "you're not making decisions here. You're just following orders, and when this operation is complete, you'll become a liability." Sarah's grip on the detonator tightened, but I could see doubt creeping into her expression. "Even if that were true," she said, "it doesn't change the situation. I still have the trigger, and your father still dies if I release it. Unless we work together to find a solution that saves both of you." "Both of us?" "You and my father. Because, Sarah, despite everything you've done, I don't want to see you die either." The admission surprised even me, but it was true. The woman who deceived and betrayed me had still shown me moments of genuine warmth and affection. The relationship might have been built on lies, but not every moment between us had been false. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "I'm proposing that you help me disarm that bomb and escape from this warehouse before Blackstone's cleanup crew arrives to eliminate all the witnesses." "Cleanup crew?" You don't think they're planning to leave any of us alive, do you? My father and I know too much. Your backup knows too much. You know too much. Everyone in this room is scheduled to die tonight, probably within the next hour. The gunman's radio crackled with an incoming message that confirmed my worst fears. Package is compromised. Initiate cleanup protocol. No survivors. Sarah's face went white as the implication sank in. They're going to kill all of us, she whispered. Unless we work together to get out of here alive. Sarah looked at the gunman, who was now raising his assault rifle toward me, probably planning to eliminate the immediate threat before proceeding with the cleanup protocol. In that moment, Sarah made a choice that surprised both of us. She dove sideways, away from my father, while simultaneously throwing the detonator toward me. The gunman, confused by her sudden movement, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for me to draw my M1911 and put 3 rounds center mass. The detonator landed at my feet, its dead man's switch still engaged. As long as I kept pressure on the button, the bomb wouldn't detonate. Alexander, my father said urgently, the bomb has a secondary timer. Look at the display. I looked at the device strapped to his chest and saw a digital countdown, 3:47, 3:46, 3:45. Less than 4 minutes before the bomb exploded regardless of the trigger. Sarah, how do I disarm this thing? 6-digit code, she said, blood seeping from a gunshot wound in her shoulder where she'd been caught by the gunman's return fire. But I don't know what it is. Who does know? The technical specialist who built it. He's with the Blackstone team. Through my radio, I could hear the sounds of the firefight intensifying as the reinforcements engaged my team. We were running out of time on multiple fronts. All units, this is Alexander. I have the hostage, but we need immediate extraction. Building is wired to explode. Roger, came Diego's response. We've got vehicles at the south entrance, but heavy resistance between us and you. 320, 319, 318. Sarah, is there any other way to disarm this device? Cut the right wire, she said weakly, but cut the wrong one and it detonates immediately. I looked at the complex array of wires connected to the explosive device. Red, blue, yellow, green, black, white. At least a dozen different connections that could either save my father's life or end it instantly. Which wire? I don't know. That information was need to know, and I didn't need to know. 245, 244, 243. Dad, I said, I'm going to get you out of that chair and we're going to run. Alexander, the bomb is attached to the chair. If I move more than 3 feet away, it detonates automatically. How do you know that? They explained the system to me, very thoroughly. Sarah was losing blood but still conscious. Alexander, there might be another way. What? The Blackstone technical specialist. He's in a command vehicle outside, if we can get to him. How do we identify the command vehicle? Black SUV with satellite communications equipment. License plate starts with BH, Blackstone Holdings. 215, 214, 213. I made a decision that violated every principle of hostage rescue and personal safety. Sarah, can you walk? I think so. Dad, I'm leaving you here for exactly 90 seconds. Don't move, don't panic, and trust me to come back. Alexander. Dad, I love you. I'm not leaving you to die. I helped Sarah to her feet, and we moved toward the warehouse exit, her leaning heavily on my shoulder as blood continued to seep from her gunshot wound. The main warehouse was chaos. My team was engaged in running firefights with Blackstone's security force, using shipping containers and industrial equipment as cover while bullets flew in all directions. Diego, I called into my radio, I need covering fire to reach the parking area. Roger, Tommy, Rico, lay down suppression fire. Alexander's moving. The next 30 seconds were a blur of gunfire, movement, and adrenaline. Sarah and I reached the side entrance just as a black SUV came into view, parked between two other vehicles and bristling with communication equipment. "That's it," Sarah gasped. I could see two figures inside the SUV, a driver and a passenger who was working with electronic equipment that probably controlled the bomb strapped to my father. 135, 134, 133. I raised my M1911 and put a bullet through the SUV's rear window, then sprinted toward the vehicle while Sarah provided what covering fire she could with a pistol she'd taken from the dead gunman. The technical specialist was a thin man in his 40s, surrounded by laptops and communication gear. When he saw me approaching, he reached for a weapon, but I was faster. "The disarm code," I said, pressing my gold-plated pistol against his temple. "Now." "I don't know what you're talking about." 115, 114, 113. "The bomb you strapped to my father. The 6-digit disarm code. You have 10 seconds before I put a bullet in your brain." "Okay. It's 283,947. I left him zip-tied to the steering wheel and sprinted back toward the warehouse, Sarah struggling to keep up despite her injury. 058, 057, 056. The warehouse was still a war zone, but my team had established a defensive perimeter that allowed me to reach the office where my father waited. "Dad, the code is 283,947. Where's the input panel?" I looked at the bomb device and found a small digital keypad on the side facing away from my father. 045, 044, 043. 283947. The timer stopped at 012. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the device emitted a soft beep, and all the lights went dark. "It's disarmed," my father said quietly. I cut the straps holding him to the chair and helped him stand. He was shaky, but uninjured aside from bruises and exhaustion. "All units, this is Alexander. Package secured, bomb disarmed. Prepare for immediate extraction." 3 hours later, we were back at Sterling and Associates, treating wounds and processing what had happened. Sarah had been taken to a private medical facility where Diego's contacts could provide treatment without involving official channels that might complicate our situation. My father sat in his office chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him, but alive and safe. The experience had been traumatic, but Jonathan Sterling was too tough to be broken by one night of terror. "Alexander," he said, "what you did tonight, the risks you took, the people you brought together, I've never been more proud of you. I couldn't let them destroy everything you built." "What we built," he corrected. "This firm belongs to both of us now." Over the next several hours, as my team dispersed back to their regular lives and the immediate crisis passed, I had time to think about the larger implications of what had happened. Blackstone, Hartley, and Morrison had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They'd moved from legitimate business competition to kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder. That meant we were no longer dealing with legal or ethical constraints in our response. "Dad," I said, "we have a choice to make." "What kind of choice?" "We can report this to the FBI, go through official channels, and hope that justice prevails. Or we can handle this the way they chose to handle it." My father studied my face with the calculating expression I'd inherited from him. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we destroy them completely. Not just their business, but their reputation, their credibility, their ability to practice law anywhere in the country." "How?" "With evidence, documentation, recorded confessions, and strategic disclosure to every media outlet, bar association, and law enforcement agency that matters." Over the next week, working with Sarah's reluctant cooperation, She'd realized that her survival depended on helping us expose Blackstone's criminal activities. We assembled a comprehensive case against the largest law firm in the country. Sarah provided detailed records of the conspiracy, including communications, financial transactions, and strategic planning documents that proved Blackstone's systematic use of criminal methods to eliminate competition. Marcus's investigation uncovered additional evidence linking Blackstone to other suspicious incidents involving competitors who'd experienced sudden business failures, regulatory problems, or personal scandals. Most damaging of all, we had recordings of Blackstone's cleanup orders and their willingness to murder witnesses to protect their conspiracy. "This isn't just about our firm," I told my father as we reviewed the evidence. "Blackstone has been systematically destroying any law firm that threatens their market dominance. We're probably not the first target, and we definitely wouldn't have been the last." "What's our distribution strategy?" Simultaneous release to the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, and every major legal publication in the country, plus formal complaints to the American Bar Association, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." That evening, I visited Sarah at the secure medical facility, where she was recovering from surgery to repair her gunshot wound. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Like someone who's about to become the most wanted woman in America," she replied. "Not if you testify against Blackstone. The federal prosecutor I spoke with today is very interested in offering you immunity in exchange for cooperation." "And if I don't cooperate?" "Then you face charges for kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling of her hospital room. "Alexander," she said finally, "I want you to know that the feelings I developed for you, those were real. Even though the relationship was built on deception, what I felt wasn't fake." "I know. Do you think you could ever forgive me?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since the moment I'd realized her betrayal. "I think forgiveness is possible," I said, "but trust isn't. What we had is over, Sarah. It has to be." "I understand. But I also think you deserve a chance to rebuild your life, doing something better than corporate espionage and kidnapping." "What would that be?" "Testify against Blackstone. Help us make sure this never happens to anyone else. Use your skills to protect people instead of destroying them." 3 days later, the story broke simultaneously across every major news outlet in the country. Blackstone law firm conspiracy, kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder in corporate war. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Within hours, federal agents were raiding Blackstone offices in 12 cities, arresting senior partners and seizing financial records that revealed decades of criminal activity disguised as aggressive business practices. James Blackstone himself was arrested at his estate in the Hamptons, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and racketeering under the RICO statute. The legal profession was shocked, but not entirely surprised. Blackstone's ruthless tactics had been whispered about for years, but no one had been able to prove the extent of their criminal methods. Within a week, major corporate clients began terminating their relationships with Blackstone, Hartley, and Morrison. Within a month, the firm was in bankruptcy proceedings. Within 6 months, it had ceased to exist entirely. Sterling and Associates, meanwhile, experienced the kind of growth that usually takes decades to achieve. Clients who'd been intimidated into staying with Blackstone now sought representation from the firm that had exposed their criminal activities. Our reputation for integrity and courage attracted the most prestigious cases in the country. A year later, we opened offices in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. 2 years later, we were recognized as the fastest-growing law firm in America. 5 years later, We were the largest independent law firm in the world, built on a foundation of ethical practice and genuine commitment to justice. Epilogue: Justice served. 7 years after that terrible night in the warehouse, I was sitting in my corner office in our Manhattan headquarters, reviewing a case that would determine the future of corporate accountability in America, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Sterling, there's someone here to see you, says it's personal." Sarah Chen walked into my office looking completely different from the woman who'd once held my father's life in her hands. She was dressed professionally but modestly, her hair shorter, her manner more subdued. The calculating coldness I'd seen in the warehouse had been replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "Hello, Alexander. Sarah, I heard you'd been released." She'd served 3 years in federal prison after testifying against Blackstone, then disappeared into witness protection. This was the first time I'd seen her since the trial. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for giving me the chance to do the right thing finally." "What are you doing now?" "I work for a nonprofit organization that provides legal assistance to domestic violence victims. Paralegal work mostly, but it's meaningful." "I'm glad." "Alexander, I know this is probably inappropriate, but I needed to tell you something." "What?" "What we had those months when we were together. I know it was built on lies, but for me, it was the most honest I'd ever been about wanting something good in my life." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but saw only sincerity and regret. "I'm married now," I said gently. "I know. I read about your wedding in the legal journals. She seems like a wonderful woman." My wife Rebecca was indeed wonderful, a federal prosecutor I'd met during the Blackstone trials, someone who shared my commitment to justice and understood the responsibilities that came with our success. "Sarah," I said, "I want you to know that I don't hate you. What you did was terrible, but you also made a choice to help us when it mattered most. That counts for something." "Does it count enough for forgiveness?" "It counts enough for me to wish you well and hope you continue building a better life." Sarah smiled, genuinely, without calculation or hidden motive, for the first time since I'd known her. "That's more than I deserve, but I'll take it." After she left, I sat alone in my office thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Blackstone's betrayal had nearly destroyed everything my family cared about, but it had also forced us to become stronger, more principled, and more committed to the values that made our work meaningful. Sterling and Associates now employed over 300 attorneys across 6 offices, representing clients from Fortune 500 companies to pro bono cases for people who couldn't afford legal representation. We'd built something that was both financially successful and ethically uncompromising. Most importantly, we'd proven that justice could triumph over corruption, that integrity could defeat manipulation, and that good people working together could overcome any challenge. The revenge I'd taken against Blackstone hadn't been personal or petty. It had been systematic, legal, and complete. We'd used their own tactics against them, but within the bounds of law and ethics they'd chosen to abandon. James Blackstone died in federal prison, his reputation destroyed, and his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. His firm disappeared from history, remembered only as an example of how not to practice law. My father lived to see Sterling and Associates become everything he dreamed it could be, and more. At 78, he was still coming to the office every day, still fighting for clients who needed someone to believe in justice. And I had learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so good, so strong, and so principled that their corruption becomes irrelevant by comparison. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's worth waiting for.